6:47 a.m., Tuesday morning. The kind of quiet where you can hear sprinklers hissing and birds waking up. Then clang. The sound of bolt cutters slicing through my security chain echoed through the perfect silence like gunfire. That metallic snap didn't just break steel, it ended someone's freedom. Because in that moment, an HOA Karen named Bethany Kensington Wright went from community president to federal felon. She thought she was towing an eyesore. She actually stole a government surveillance vehicle tied to cartel operations worth over $300,000. And the man who owned it? Yeah, that was me. Marcus Tank Rodriguez, Army MP, federal task force agent. The guy whose job is putting people like her behind bars. But this story didn't start that morning. It started 3 months earlier, when I inherited my grandmother's house in Willowbrook Estates, a place that looked perfect from the outside. Manicured lawns, white fences, neighbors who waved just long enough to judge you. The kind of suburb that smelled like fresh mulch and quiet desperation. Grandma Rosa always called it her piece of the American dream. I just called it home. After my parents died in a car crash when I was 12, she raised me in that house. That kitchen still smelled like her homemade tortillas and vanilla candles. The old floorboards creaked with her laughter. When she passed, the house felt like the last piece of her I had left. I wanted to rent it out during deployment, build equity, keep it in the family, just like she wanted. But I had no idea the neighborhood had changed. See, Willowbrook wasn't just another suburban community, it was a kingdom. And every kingdom has a ruler. Ours was Bethany Kensington Wright, 52 years old, real estate agent, and self-proclaimed defender of community standards. She drove a white Lexus SUV that never saw dirt, wore tennis skirts like a uniform, and carried a ruler to measure grass height. 7 years as HOA president had turned her into something worse than a control freak. She was a suburban dictator. Her husband Carl sat on city council, which made her feel untouchable. Everyone called her Madam President, half-jokingly. But jokes stop being funny when power turns into obsession. The first time I saw her, she was standing at the community gate, clipboard in hand, scolding a delivery guy because his truck had offensive bumper stickers. I remember thinking, there's no way this woman runs the neighborhood like a military base. Turns out she ran it tighter. She fined people for leaving trash cans out a minute late, for Christmas lights in January, for fences one shade off regulation beige. And everyone, every single resident, was scared of her. When I got deployed overseas, I left my government-issued Jeep parked in Grandma's driveway. It was a tactical Wrangler, standard law enforcement issue for the Federal Drug Task Force. Covered in government decals, registration papers taped inside the window, and loaded with surveillance gear I couldn't store anywhere else. $200,000 worth of federal tech, GPS trackers, encrypted radios, and covert cameras. All locked, sealed, and secured. I even sent the HOA a courtesy email about my deployment, explaining the situation. No response. I figured everything was fine. Then, 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed in the middle of a desert outpost. An email from the Willowbrook HOA. Violation notice. Unauthorized vehicle. Daily fine? $50? I thought it had to be a mistake. They were citing a federal law enforcement vehicle as an eyesore. But mistakes don't escalate into threats. I called my sister, Maya, a middle school teacher, soft-spoken, the kind of person who sees good in everyone. She was living in Grandma's house while I was gone, taking care of things. "Tank," she said, "this woman's insane." She won't listen. Maya told me she'd gone to Bethany's house with my deployment papers in hand, explaining I was active duty and couldn't move the Jeep. Bethany just smirked, arms crossed, standing on her perfect porch. "Rules are rules, dear," she said. "If your brother can't follow them, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your family." That sentence hit harder than any bullet I dodged overseas. Maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your family. The tone, the look, like we didn't belong. Like my service, our family's sacrifice was an inconvenience to her HOA fantasy world. When Maya told me that, I could hear the crack in her voice over the satellite line. She's tough, but she's never had to face someone like Bethany. The fear in her tone felt heavier than the gear on my back. "Tank," she whispered. "She said Carl knows people at the school district, that if I make trouble, it could affect my job." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a parking rule. This was about power, intimidation, control. So I started digging, remotely, from a tent halfway across the world. Maya scanned Grandma's old HOA papers, the ones from when she bought the house in 1987, and that's when we found the first crack in Bethany's empire. The original bylaws, yellowed pages with faded signatures, clearly stated that government, emergency, and military vehicles were exempt from parking restrictions. That meant every fine, every notice, every threat was completely illegal. Bethany wasn't enforcing rules. She was fabricating them, and she wasn't just targeting me. Maya discovered a pattern. The Johnsons, a Marine family, were fined for a loud motorcycle. The Washingtons, Navy family, received citations because their baby cried at night, labeled excessive noise. Sarah Martinez, whose husband was deployed, got written up for having unprofessional garden decor. Every military family, every single one, targeted. The deeper we looked, the worse it got. Bethany had built a system designed to push people out, families who couldn't fight back while loved ones were deployed. And with Carl on city council, she had political backup. People were too scared to challenge her. Neighbors whispered over fences, called her the HOA witch, but nobody stood up. Because she could ruin your life with one letter. I still remember that night vividly. Sand in my teeth, sweat stinging my eyes, the sound of distant gunfire. I was thousands of miles away, fighting people who trafficked drugs across borders. And meanwhile, some suburban tyrant was trying to steal my family's home through fake paperwork. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in my head. "Mijo, you stand up to bullies, but you do it the right way." That line replayed over and over as I read Maya's emails, saw the scanned violation notices piling up. $50 a day stacking endlessly. Threats of property liens, talk of towing. I knew what that meant. They wanted to create enough financial pressure to force a sale, to make us give up Grandma's house, to make sure families like ours left Willowbrook for good. But what Bethany didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that I wasn't just a soldier. I was a federal agent on a task force that specialized in dismantling organized crime. And what she was doing wasn't community enforcement. It was criminal fraud, harassment, and discrimination. That night, I made a promise. From that desert base, surrounded by sand and static, I vowed to bring her down, not with anger, but with law. With precision. With justice. I started documenting everything. Every email, every fine, every message Maya forwarded. I sent it to JAG, Judge Advocate General, the military's legal branch. Within hours, I got a response from Staff Sergeant Williams. I could hear the controlled fury in her voice through the encrypted line. "Rodriguez, this woman just threatened to steal federal law enforcement property." That's not an HOA violation. That's a federal felony. It felt like someone lit a fuse. Because in that moment, it stopped being a personal dispute. It became a federal case. But before the subpoenas, before the marshals, before the national headlines, there was just me, my sister, and one old house filled with memories. The house where Grandma Rosa taught us that courage isn't about fighting. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. Every time Maya called, her voice shaking, I told her the same thing. "We're not backing down. We're doing this the right way." She'd laugh softly, even through tears. "Just like Grandma said, huh?" "Yeah, just like Grandma said." None of us knew then that this little suburban feud was about to explode into one of the biggest HOA takedowns in federal history. That one woman's obsession with power would unravel an entire network of corruption, discrimination, and fraud. Or that by the end of it all, she'd be in handcuffs, crying in her bathrobe, while the same neighbors she terrorized cheered her downfall. But that part comes later. For now, all I knew was this. I wasn't going to let anyone erase my grandmother's legacy. Not a petty woman with a clipboard. Not a fake set of rules. Not even an entire corrupt system hiding behind white fences and perfect lawns. Because when you push the wrong soldier too far, you don't just get resistance. You get justice. And Bethany Kensington Wright was about to learn that the hard way. So tell me, if someone threatened your home while you were serving overseas, would you forgive them? Or would you make sure they never hurt another family again? Drop a flag emoji if you'd fight back. Let's see how many patriots still believe standing up to bullies is the American way. 3 months before that bolt cutter sliced through my lock, I thought I had life figured out. After years of deployments and chasing cartel runners across state lines, I just wanted peace. Grandma Rosa's house was supposed to be that peace, a safe place to breathe again, a little slice of normal in a world that never stopped spinning. The old place sat on Maplewood Lane, under a big oak tree that shaded her porch just right at sunset. You could still smell her tortillas in the walls, cinnamon candles on the shelves, and that faint hint of coffee she'd brew every morning before humming her favorite ranchera tunes. When she passed, she left me the house and one simple note. Mijo, never let anyone take what's ours. Stand up for what's right, but do it with honor. That note lived in my wallet. It reminded me of who I was. A soldier, yes, but also her grandson. The boy she raised after a drunk driver ended my parents' lives when I was 12. Every scar I carried from the battlefield, every discipline I learned, came from her kitchen table. She taught me about strength, but more importantly, restraint. That's why, when I inherited the house, I didn't see it as property. I saw it as a promise, to protect her legacy, to build something good out of everything she'd sacrificed. Willowbrook Estates looked perfect when I drove in that first day. Tree-lined streets, houses that all matched like soldiers in formation, sprinklers hissing on schedule, kids riding bikes in clean driveways. The kind of neighborhood realtors call idyllic. But the perfection was an illusion. Beneath that symmetry was control. Fear. You could feel it in the way neighbors glanced at each other, careful, rehearsed, like every conversation was being monitored. The first warning came from an old veteran named Tom Henderson. Vietnam vet, silver hair, strong handshake. He was walking his dog when I pulled in. He nodded at the Jeep parked in Grandma's driveway, saw the military plates, and gave me that look only other servicemen understand. Your Tank, right? Rosa's grandson? I nodded. His face softened. She was a good woman. You keep your head down around here, son. The HOA don't like uniforms. I thought he was joking. I even laughed, but he didn't. I'm serious, he said quietly. Keep that Jeep in the garage if you can. Bethany's the kind that measures grass and souls with the same ruler. He walked off without another word. I didn't understand what he meant until I met her. Bethany Kensington Wright. Picture the kind of woman who thinks power means perfection. Platinum hair, white tennis skirt, and a fake smile that could cut glass. She introduced herself with a clipboard in one hand and a coffee cup labeled President. You must be Rosa's grandson, she said, eyes scanning my boots, my Jeep, my short military haircut. Welcome to Willowbrook. We value. Order here. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were measuring me like I was a threat to her kingdom. She handed me a packet, 37 pages of community standards, and a warning disguised as hospitality. We've had some issues with residents storing work vehicles in their driveways. I'm sure you understand how that can affect property values. Her gaze drifted toward the Jeep like it offended her personally. Ma'am, I said, calm and polite. That's not a work vehicle. It's government property. Her smile tightened. Of course. Just make sure it's covered or parked discreetly. We like to maintain a certain aesthetic. Aesthetic. That word told me everything. She didn't care what kind of man I was, only what image my presence painted on her street. For the first 2 weeks, I tried to play by her rules. I trimmed the lawn, fixed the shutters, and waved at neighbors who mostly waved back like they were afraid to be seen doing it. I didn't realize then that every nod, every whisper, every quick glance toward my Jeep wasn't politeness. It was surveillance. Bethany ran this place like a fiefdom. Every email, every letter, every fine went through her hands. People joked she was the mayor of Maplewood, but it wasn't a joke. She decided who got warnings, who got approvals, who got silence. Then I got the first notice. A yellow slip tucked under my door. Violation Unauthorized vehicle storage. $50 fine. Due immediately. I stared at it, thinking it had to be a mistake. I emailed her, respectfully explaining that I was Army Reserve and my vehicle was federally owned. No reply. 2 days later, another fine appeared. Then another. That's when Maya stepped in. My little sister, soft-spoken but fierce when she needed to be. She drove over to Bethany's house with my deployment orders and tried to reason with her. I'll never forget the call I got afterward. "Tank," she said, voice trembling. She looked me dead in the eyes and said if we can't follow rules, we should consider selling. She said she knows people who can make our lives difficult. Maya was scared, and I was furious. But Grandma's voice in my head kept me from exploding. Do it the right way, mijo. So I started looking closer. Bethany wasn't just some rule-loving HOA president. She was a manipulator. Her husband, Carl, sat on city council. That gave her political backing. Developers needed his approval for permits, and in return, she controlled the neighborhood votes that made those projects possible. Every decision in Willowbrook ran through them like a power couple feeding on paperwork. I found out later that Carl had a side deal brewing, a plan to sell multiple Willowbrook properties to a development firm for luxury condos. But they couldn't close the deal unless certain problem properties were cleared first. Military. Families, retirees, anyone who didn't fit their perfect image were suddenly drowning in violation notices. Coincidence? Not a chance. The pattern was obvious once I saw it. The Johnsons, Marine family, fined for a non-compliant fence color. The Washingtons, Navy, cited for excessive driveway clutter because their son's bike was outside. Sarah Martinez, an Air Force widow, fined for unauthorized garden decor because she placed a flag near her husband's memorial plaque. All of them targeted, all of them isolated. Bethany counted on intimidation to work like gravity. Quiet, constant, unseen. Maya started noticing the fear, too. Parents whispering at school, neighbors avoiding eye contact, letters piling up. The whole community lived under her microscope. And the more I read those emails and scanned those documents, overseas, the clearer it became. This wasn't neighborhood maintenance. This was organized harassment, a suburban version of tyranny fueled by fake authority. I remember sitting in a dusty tent under a burning sky, staring at that HOA notice glowing on my laptop. Around me, guys were cleaning rifles, joking about going home, missing their kids. And all I could think about was that woman back home, threatening my sister, threatening my grandmother's house. A different kind of war, one fought with paperwork instead of bullets. That's when I called JAG, the Judge Advocate General's office. Military lawyers who handle soldiers' rights. I explained everything. They asked for documentation. I sent screenshots, violation letters, even audio clips of Bethany's threats that Maya had recorded on her phone. The officer on the line was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Sergeant Rodriguez, this isn't an HOA issue. This is a federal crime waiting to happen." But I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability, justice. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every family too scared to speak up. The Hendersons, the Washingtons, the Johnsons, all bullied into silence. I promised myself I'd be the one to end it. When I got back stateside for leave, I drove through Willowbrook again. Same clean lawns, same perfect mailboxes. But this time, I saw the fear behind it. Neighbors closed curtains as I passed, mailboxes stuffed with warning slips. And there she was, Bethany, standing in her driveway, ruler in hand, measuring some poor guy's grass like a warden checking cell bars. She saw me, smiled, waved that fake, perfect wave. "Welcome home, Officer Rodriguez," she called, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I trust your vehicle issues have been resolved?" I smiled back, calm and controlled. "Almost, ma'am. I just have one more thing to take care of." She had no idea that behind that smile was a soldier gathering evidence, a federal agent, who knew exactly how to dismantle criminal organizations from the inside out. That night, I stood on Grandma's porch, looking out at the neighborhood. The hum of sprinklers, the flicker of porch lights, the smell of cut grass. It all felt different now. Like I was standing in enemy territory disguised as paradise. I thought about Grandma's words again. Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. I finally understood what she meant. The right way isn't loud, it's patient, it's strategic, it's gathering truth until your enemy hangs themselves with their own lies. And that's exactly what I was about to do, because Bethany Kensington Wright didn't just mess with a soldier. She messed with a federal agent trained to take down crime rings twice as organized as her little HOA empire. She just didn't know it yet. In her mind, she was the queen of Willowbrook. In mine, she'd just declared war. And this time, the battlefield wasn't sand and smoke. It was paper, signatures, and federal law. So I ask you, what would you do if someone used fake rules to steal your home? Would you stay quiet? Or would you stand up, the right way, and show them what real justice looks like? Drop a flag emoji if you'd fight back, because this isn't just my story. It's every military family's fight to protect what we've earned. One home, one promise, one community at a time. 2 weeks into my deployment, the desert heat felt like it was trying to cook the inside of my skull. Sweat burned my eyes, the air smelled like diesel and dust, and somewhere in the distance a gun truck rumbled past. That's when my satellite phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it. Out here, most messages were just mission reports or family check-ins. But this one had a subject line that made my stomach twist. HOA violation notice. Unauthorized vehicle storage. I opened it, and there it was. A $50 daily fine. Reason: commercial or work vehicle stored in residential area. The offending vehicle? My government-issued Jeep, a federal task force rig worth over $200,000, filled with surveillance tech used in cartel operations. I actually laughed for a second. It had to be a mistake, right? Someone saw the decals and thought I was running a side business. So I typed a calm reply explaining everything. Ma'am, that's a federal law enforcement vehicle currently registered under government operations. I hit send, confident it would clear itself up. It didn't. 3 days later, I got another email. This one was colder. Failure to comply will result in cumulative fines and potential towing. Attached was a picture of my Jeep, taken from the street, zoomed in like a mugshot. The signature at the bottom read, Bethany Kensington Wright, HOA President. The next morning, another message came through, this time from my sister, Maya. Her voice was shaking on the call. Tank, she's serious. She came to the house. Bethany had shown up at Grandma's place in her white Lexus, clipboard in hand, and walked right up to Maya like she owned the property. Maya, being polite as always, explained that I was overseas, that the Jeep was government property. She even offered to cover it with a tarp. Bethany just smirked. Rules are rules, she said. If your brother can't follow them, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your family. That last line hit me harder than any explosion. Maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your family. The way she said your family, like we were a stain on her perfect cul-de-sac, made my blood boil. I could hear Maya trying not to cry as she told me about it. She's tough, my sister, but she's not built for confrontation. She teaches middle school. Her whole life is about patience and kindness. And now, some power-drunk suburban tyrant was threatening her job and our grandmother's home because she didn't like the look of a government Jeep. I tried to calm her down, told her to ignore it. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. A week later, another call. This time, Maya wasn't crying. She was furious. Tank, she threatened to put a lien on the house. And she told me Carl, her husband, has friends on the school board. She said if I keep arguing, it might affect my position. That's when I knew this wasn't about the Jeep anymore. This was about power. See, I'd dealt with bullies before. Warlords, gang leaders, cartel lieutenants who used fear to control people. But this was something different. This was a Karen with a clipboard and political connections, using bureaucracy as her weapon. I called a few of the neighbors I'd met when Grandma passed. People who'd brought casseroles. Sent cards, whispered, "You're lucky Bethany likes you." Turns out, they weren't lucky. They were scared. The Johnsons, a Marine family down the block, got fined for their motorcycle being too loud. The Hendersons, an elderly couple, were cited for unapproved. Fencing. A Navy wife named Sarah Martinez got violation. Letters because her garden gnomes were unprofessional. And here's the kicker. Every single one of them was either military or related to someone in service. Maya started digging through Grandma's old paperwork, bless her heart. She found the original HOA bylaws from 1987, signed when Grandma first bought the house. The rules back then clearly said government, law enforcement, and emergency vehicles are exempt from parking restrictions. You heard that right, exempt, meaning Bethany was lying. Fabricating new rules and enforcing fake ones, counting on people being too intimidated or too busy to check. When Maya told me that over the phone, I felt my pulse spike. She sent me photos of the documents, old, yellowed pages, creases worn from age, but clear as day. Grandma's signature, the original HOA president's stamp, and that one crucial line that made Bethany's entire argument crumble. I remember staring at that photo under a flickering tent light, sandstorm howling outside, thinking, she's not just power-hungry, she's criminal. The more Maya uncovered, the uglier it got. She found minutes from HOA meetings, all signed by Bethany, that didn't match the versions sent to residents. Dozens of fake amendments had been added. Revised parking ordinance, updated community appearance policy, all of it designed to give her more control. But the part that made my blood run cold came from an email chain Maya discovered between Bethany and her husband, Carl, city councilman, developer, suburban kingpin. They were discussing a potential development deal called Willowbrook Phase 2. It included 47 homes, all currently occupied, that were marked as pending acquisition. And among them, Grandma Rosa's address. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just a Karen with a ruler. This was organized real estate fraud. They were systematically driving out military families, elderly residents, and anyone who couldn't fight back, so Carl could sell their properties at below market value to developers. I could taste the sand between my teeth as I listened to Maya explain it, her voice trembling. "Tank, they've been doing this for years. Every military family who moves here gets targeted. Everyone. Out here in the desert, the enemy is obvious. They shoot at you. Back home, it's paperwork and fake smiles. I knew I couldn't let this go. So I reached out to JAG, the Judge Advocate General's office. I emailed them every violation letter, every fake document Maya found. Within 24 hours, I got a call from Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams. Her voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the fire underneath. "Rodriguez," she said, "this isn't an HOA issue. This is a federal problem. This woman's trying to seize federal property while you're deployed overseas. That's a felony under the Service Members Civil Relief Act." I remember gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. For the first time, I felt the tide shift. Williams told me she was filing a formal complaint through base command. That would trigger a federal review, meaning Bethany's little suburban empire was now on the radar of people who could actually end her. But before any paperwork went through, she escalated again. Because that's what bullies do. They double down when they sense they're losing control. 2 days later, Maya called me in tears. "Tank, there's a tow truck circling the block. They're saying your Jeep's being removed tomorrow morning for community safety violations." I could hear the fear in her voice, the same creak of Grandma's old kitchen floorboards beneath her feet, the sound of her holding the phone with shaking hands. "They're saying the vehicle is a danger to the neighborhood," she whispered. "They're saying it could contain weapons. That's when I lost it. She wasn't just abusing power anymore, she was defaming me. A deployed soldier. "Maya, listen," I said, trying to stay calm. "Do not engage. Record everything. Get photos, get video, get witnesses. I don't care if it's the mailman. Record everything." That night I barely slept. Half the squad was out on patrol, but my mind wasn't on the desert. It was back home, on that quiet street where one corrupt woman was trying to erase everything my grandmother had built. When the sun came up, I called Williams again. "It's escalating," I said. She didn't hesitate. "Copy that," she replied. We're moving this up the chain. That's when I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. Bethany wasn't afraid of me because she didn't think I could touch her. To her, I was just a soldier, gone overseas, powerless. But she didn't understand what kind of soldier I was. I wasn't just trained to fight enemies with guns. I was trained to dismantle criminal networks, methodically, legally, permanently, and she'd just declared war on the wrong federal agent. I started planning my counterattack, not with violence, but with precision. Step 1, documentation. Every call, every letter, every fine. Step 2, federal escalation. Williams had already sent my case to the Inspector General for Military Affairs. Step 3, exposure. Maya began talking to other families, collecting their stories. Within a week, she had a file thick enough to make any prosecutor salivate. Proof of discrimination, fraud, and intimidation. But the war didn't stop there. Bethany sent one more letter, carbon-copied to the police department and Carl's city council office. Emergency towing authorized due to health and safety violations. Complete fiction. But it looked official, printed on HOA letterhead with city logos she had no right to use. That letter, and the stunt she pulled afterward, would be the final mistake of her life. Because when you cross the line from petty to criminal, the law stops playing nice. What Bethany didn't realize is that every click of her camera, every threat she made, every bolt she cut, it was all being recorded, documented, and prepared for the moment when her perfect little kingdom came crashing down. She thought she was harassing a soldier. She was actually provoking a federal takedown, and as much as I wanted to handle it like a soldier, Grandma's voice echoed in my head again. Do it the right way, mijo. So I did. I gathered my evidence. I lined up my witnesses. And I waited, because the moment she made her next move, the hammer of federal justice was going to fall. Hard. So tell me, what would you do if someone tried to steal your property while you were overseas serving your country? Would you stay quiet? Or would you make sure they never did it again? Drop a flag emoji if you'd stand your ground. Because this is just where the fight begins. The moment I realized this was bigger than a parking fight, I could feel it like a chill running up my spine. From 8,000 miles away, in a tin-roofed communications tent where the hum of generators never stopped, I watched Maya send me photos and scanned documents as if she were trying to keep the house alive with a string of JPEGs. What started as a petty HOA notice turned into a breadcrumb trail, and each breadcrumb led to the same person, Bethany Kensington Wright. Maya found meeting minutes. She found revised bylaws with handwriting that didn't match the originals. She found a stack of violation notices that had never been voted on by the board. But the thing that made my jaw drop was an email chain between Bethany and her husband, Carl, referencing a Phase 2 acquisition strategy for Willowbrook. It wasn't just small-time petty enforcement. It was a plan, a blueprint to clear entire homes off the block, to make them sellable to developers who wanted uniform, quiet, complaint-free condos. There it was in black and white, a list of target addresses marked high priority. Grandma Rosa's name was on it. That's when the case stopped being personal and started being criminal. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. These weren't words I tossed around lightly. I'd investigated cartel financiers who used shell companies and fake contracts to launder money. The patterns were burning familiar. Power is a currency just like cash, and Bethany had been trading in it for years. She manufactured infractions, piled on fines, and used political connections to steamroll anyone who stood in the way. People didn't fight back because they were afraid of job repercussions, of social ostracism, of legal bills. She weaponized boredom and bureaucracy against people with real lives. Maya's voice over the phone was steady the day she sent me the smoking gun, a document that connected the dots. It was an invoice paying a consulting company for community improvement. The vendor? A shell company that traced back to Carl's development firm. The amount? Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned from HOA accounts for services that never happened. When she scanned that file, I could hear the floor creak as she set it down. Tank, she said. They've been stealing from the community and using the money to bribe contractors and pay off people who keep quiet. I felt that old switch flip inside me, the one that made me methodical instead of emotional. This wasn't a rant in a Facebook group. This was systemic theft that touched state lines. When finances cross jurisdictions, federal statutes wake up. I began assembling everything the way I'd been trained to: chain of custody for files, metadata for emails, timestamps on photos. I sent secure packets to JAG and to a contacts I had from task force work. They didn't treat it like small-town drama. They treated it like evidence. But power has a way of blinding people. Bethany assumed everyone would accept the story she'd written for them, that she was the neighborhood's moral compass, protecting property values from the ugliness of real life. She could legislate out the messy parts: military trailers, tools in driveways, the odd truck with government plates, and call it public safety. When neighbors asked questions, she smiled and showed them the updated bylaws. When anyone else objected, she leaned on Carl's councilman influence. That influence had teeth. City staffers returned her calls faster than anyone else's. Building permits, towing authorizations, special enforcement notices. Suddenly, the small things piled up into something menacing. Maya stopped being quiet. She started doing what teachers do best. She organized. She printed copies of bylaws and handed them to neighbors. She taped up meeting minutes on the community center board so people could read what had actually been decided and what had been made up. She tracked account transfers with the tenacity of someone who grades papers at midnight and notices when a number doesn't add up. The teacher in her became a kind of investigator, patient, thorough, and absolutely relentless. Neighbors who had been silent began to speak. Old Mr. Henderson, who'd fought in Vietnam, put down his morning paper and said he'd had enough. Sarah Martinez, who'd buried her husband last year, came forward with correspondence showing Bethany's repeated citations over the most trivial things. Stories flowed out like a river that had been dammed for too long, forged signatures, surprise inspections at dusk, fines for things that never existed. A common thread stitched through every story. Bethany used the fear of fines and liens to force families to sell. Carl's pockets got fatter while Willowbrook's residents grew poorer and quieter. Once the pattern was public, the risk for them got higher. Expose a scheme and you expose the people who enabled it. Maya understood that, so she built a paper trail that left no room for the usual he said, she said defenses. She gathered bank statements, deposit records, and names of contractors who'd been paid for work that never occurred. She collected audio from recordings she'd made of Bethany's meetings and of the times Bethany tried to intimidate her in the driveway. She even got affidavits from neighbors who'd been pressured to sign away. Rights during special board meetings they hadn't been invited to. The real turning point came when we realized Bethany hadn't simply been taking money, but she'd been manufacturing rules to make the money. Fake ordinances were created, then enforced with fines, then used to justify liens, and the lien process was engineered to push families into selling quickly and quietly. When a developer waits with a contract and you're under the weight of fines and a looming legal battle, decisions get rushed. People sell at a loss just to escape the harassment. It's human behavior 101. It's also the cornerstones of a fraudulent acquisition strategy. From the tent in the desert, I coordinated like I was back in a task force house, secure lines to JAG, encrypted emails to federal contacts, and a rolling log of everything Maya collected. Staff Sergeant Williams wasn't surprised by what I sent. She said simply, "This fits a pattern we see in organized schemes. Embezzlement, fraud, civil rights violations when a protected class is targeted. These are federal matters." That word, organized, changed the legal landscape. This wasn't an HOA gone rogue. This could be racketeering. RICO isn't a word people throw around casually, but when you look at a coordinated scheme crossing city limits, trying to influence markets and silence opposition, it becomes relevant fast. That's when the neighborhood changed tone. People who had been too scared to speak out suddenly had lawyers calling them. A local reporter got wind of the documents and asked for an interview. Phone calls that had been ignored for years started getting returned. The same people who had once nodded politely at Bethany now had subpoenas in their future. The axis of power she'd built began to tremble, and of course, like any cornered animal, Bethany became more dangerous. When your toolbox is letters and authority and those are taken away, you use anything available. Anonymous complaints, forged emergency declarations, sudden security patrols around specific houses. She hired a private security company and told them to monitor community compliance. The guards took pictures, wrote reports, and made the rounds like they were cataloging criminal profiles. It looked official, but behind the uniforms were people who hadn't asked a single legal question. They photographed the inside of windows and recorded license plates like they were compiling dossiers. That overreach would come back to haunt them. Through it all, Maya didn't panic. She kept teaching, kept making copies, and kept bringing more neighbors into the light. The school where she worked became a hub for people who needed a safe place to tell their stories. Students' parents showed up at community meetings holding printouts. The PTA folded itself into a grassroots campaign for accountability. The small-town machinery that had fed Bethany's power, the backroom deals, the whispered assurances, started to creak under public pressure. It's strange how fast the air changes once the truth is visible. Where there had been whispers and closed doors, there were now open conversations and shared outrage. People who had been isolated found each other. The soldier's jeep in the driveway stopped being a target and started being a symbol. Not of confrontation, but of all the ways people had been pushed out for asking too many questions. By the time I came home on emergency leave for a legal briefing, the neighborhood had shifted from passive hostility to organized resistance. Flyers announcing recall petitions replaced lawn signs that promoted Bethany's leadership. Petitions were drafted. Bank accounts were frozen pending audits. A local lawyer volunteered to file a civil suit to recover embezzled funds and to force a federal review. What had begun as a single violation notice had become an exposed operation, and yet there was more to come. I'd thought exposing the financial trail and the rigged bylaws would be enough to scare them into retreat. Instead, it forced them to escalate in ways that forced the issue into federal jurisdiction. That escalation is what triggered the floodlights we needed: audits, subpoenas, and eventually the kind of federal presence that changes lives. But none of that happened overnight. It was methodical. It was patient. We matched every forged notice with original bylaws. We matched every unearned invoice with bank transfers. We compiled a record of retaliation against anyone who spoke up. It was tedious, but it was the legal equivalent of sharpening a blade. Slow, deliberate, and designed to cut clean when we finally used it. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about making sure no family would be pushed out of Willowbrook the way they'd tried to push us out. It was about turning fear into proof and proof into protection. It was, in the end, Grandma Rosa's lesson baked into action. Stand up to bullies, but do it with honor and evidence. And as that evidence mounted, I felt a strange kind of calm. Because you can't intimidate a system when the system itself is watching. When the paperwork is right, when witnesses speak up, and when money trails are exposed, even the loudest bully becomes vulnerable. We had one more step to take. But that, I knew then, would be the moment Bethany would make the mistake that cost her everything. It was 6:47 a.m. when the sound that would change everything cut through the suburban. Silence, clang, then another clang, clang. The bite of steel on steel echoed through the street like a warning bell. That was the sound of my security chain snapping, and of Bethany Kensington Wright crossing a line she could never uncross. Maya was the one who saw it first. Her morning routine was simple: make coffee, feed the cat, open the kitchen blinds. But that morning, instead of sunlight, she saw chaos. Out on the driveway, Bethany stood in her silk bathrobe, hair unbrushed, bolt cutters in her manicured hands attacking my lock like she was breaking into Fort Knox. A tow truck idled beside her. Rumbling, the smell of diesel thick in the air. She'd hired Discount Dave's towing, cash up front, no paperwork. And she was screaming orders like a general on the battlefield. Cut it! Cut it now! This vehicle is in violation of community safety. That's what she yelled, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. Maya's hands were trembling as she called me. I was still half asleep, thousands of miles away, sand still in my hair, when my phone buzzed in the dark. "Tank," she gasped, her voice shaking. "She's here. She's cutting your locks. She's stealing your Jeep right now." For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it through the line, that same metallic snap echoing through her phone speaker. The kind of sound that hits your gut before it hits your ears. I could hear the panic in Maya's breathing, the chaos of her running out the front door, yelling for Bethany to stop. "Ma'am, that's federal property. You can't touch that vehicle," she shouted. Bethany didn't even look up. "It's an eyesore. And it's being removed immediately," she snapped, her voice cracking with that same self-righteous fury I'd come to expect from her emails. The tow truck driver paused, one hand on the chain, eyes flicking from the Jeep to the federal decals plastered on the side. He took a nervous step back. "Lady, this says U.S. government right on it," he said. "You sure you got clearance for this?" Bethany's face twisted. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority." That's the thing about power. People who don't actually have it always scream the loudest. Maya was still on the phone with me, trying to record everything. "She's losing it," she whispered. "Her hands are shaking, Tank. She looks—" Then I heard it again, clang, the final snap. The chain fell. In that moment, Bethany didn't just break my lock. She broke federal law. That Jeep wasn't just a car. It was a task force surveillance vehicle containing encrypted radios, GPS trackers, covert cameras, and data from active cartel investigations across 4 states. The equipment inside was classified. Her little suburban stunt had just escalated to federal theft of government property, obstruction of justice, and national security interference. The tow truck driver must have sensed it too. He dropped the chain, eyes wide. "Nope," he said, shaking his head. "I'm out." He jumped back in his truck, slammed the door, and sped off, leaving Bethany standing there in her bathrobe, holding bolt cutters like the world's dumbest criminal mastermind. But she didn't stop. She turned to Maya, her voice rising, hysteria dripping from every word. "If your brother wants his precious military toy back, he can follow proper community procedure." And then, in front of 3 witnesses, she did the one thing that sealed her fate forever. She walked to the community gate, pulled out a new lock and key set, and chained it shut. Blocking law enforcement, blocking access, trapping federal property behind her self-made walls. She'd just declared her little neighborhood above the law. Maya kept her phone steady through her shaking hands, filming every second. "She's locked the gate," she whispered. "She said she doesn't recognize federal authority here." Those words hit me like a flashbang. Doesn't recognize federal authority. I called Captain Sarah Chen, my task force supervisor. When she picked up, her tone was calm, professional. "Rodriguez, what's the situation?" I told her everything. The theft, the equipment, the video footage. There was a pause on the line, then her voice hardened. "Understood. That's theft of federal law enforcement property. We're activating emergency protocols. Stay on this call." Within minutes, the chain of command went into motion. Homeland Security was pinged. Federal marshals were dispatched to the property. The Jeep's GPS tracker was live, showing movement alerts, timestamps, everything. See, what Bethany didn't know was that every government task force vehicle comes with a fail-safe system. The moment unauthorized access occurs, it triggers automatic alerts across multiple agencies. She'd set off alarms in 3 states. While the cavalry moved, Maya stood guard on the porch, still filming, her voice trembling but steady. "You're committing a crime, Bethany," she said. "This is all being recorded." Bethany turned, her eyes wild, her breath visible in the morning chill. "I'm protecting this neighborhood from danger," she shouted. "Military equipment doesn't belong here. It makes people unsafe." That line, that ridiculous, delusional line, it told the whole story. She wasn't just power-hungry. She believed her own lies. By the time the first sirens echoed in the distance, the neighbors had come out to watch. Curtains fluttered. Phones were out. And then something unexpected happened. People started siding with Maya. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow down the street, stepped out with her cane, voice shaking with righteous anger. "That boy serves his country," she yelled. "And you're stealing from him like a criminal." Tom Henderson, the Vietnam vet, crossed the lawn in his slippers, pointing right at Bethany. "You want his Jeep? You go through me first," he said. "You go through 30 veterans who fought for the same flag that's painted on that truck." The crowd swelled. Neighbors who had stayed silent for years were now shouting back. "Enough! Leave her alone! You're out of control!" Maya's phone caught it all. The yelling, the confusion, the moment when Bethany realized she wasn't feared anymore. You could see it in her face, the flicker of panic when the first federal vehicle turned onto the street. 2 black SUVs with flashing lights. Then another. Then the Marshal Jennifer Torres stepped out first. Calm, unflinching, the kind of woman who radiates authority. She looked at Bethany like a teacher looks at a child who just got caught cheating. "Ma'am," she said evenly, "you've obstructed federal agents and attempted to remove government property. Open that gate immediately." Bethany's face went white, but her mouth kept running. "This is private HOA property. You have no jurisdiction here." Torres' expression didn't change. "Ma'am, you are interfering with a federal investigation. I'm instructing you one last time. Open that gate." When Bethany refused, Torres simply nodded. "Okay. Step aside." The sound of bolt cutters, real ones this time, echoed through the air again, but this time they were cutting Bethany's chain. The gate swung open. Marshals poured in. Maya's camera followed as Bethany started screaming, a high, panicked shriek that barely sounded human. "This is harassment! You can't do this to me! I'm the president of this community!" Torres didn't even blink. "Not anymore." That's the thing about power. It's fragile. It's an illusion built on fear and fake authority. And when real authority shows up, it crumbles fast. By 9 a.m., federal agents had retrieved my Jeep, documented the damage, and confirmed what we already knew. The locks had been cut, the vehicle tampered with, the equipment compromised. They sealed the Jeep, tagged it as evidence, and escorted Maya to safety. Bethany stood in the middle of the street, mascara streaking, surrounded by the very neighbors she'd ruled through fear. And for the first time, she looked small, powerless, exposed. I got the footage from Maya that night. I watched it over and over, not because I enjoyed it, but because I wanted to remember exactly how arrogance dies. Not with a bang, not with an explosion, but with a clang, the sound of a lock breaking and a life unraveling. The federal report came in hours later. Theft of government property, obstruction of federal officers, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, harassment of military personnel, multiple felony counts. But the part that hit hardest wasn't the paperwork. It was the final line of the report, the one that summarized it all. Subject acted under self-appointed authority without legal jurisdiction, resulting in compromise of federal operations. That's what she'd done. She'd tried to play queen of her perfect little neighborhood, and in doing so, she committed crimes that would have made cartel bosses nervous. The next day, the story hit local news. HOA president accused of stealing federal vehicle. Cameras showed her crying behind her gates, reporters shouting questions. She said it was all a misunderstanding. But the footage didn't lie. The neighbors didn't lie. And the federal government? It doesn't misunderstand theft, Maya called me that night. Her voice was calm for the first time in weeks. "Tank," she said. "The whole neighborhood's standing up. They're forming a new board. People are finally speaking out." For the first time, I let myself smile. Not because it was over, not yet, but because the tide had turned. Fear had flipped sides. Bethany thought she could take on one family. She ended up taking on the United States government, and she lost. So tell me, if someone broke into your property, tried to steal what you protected, would you stay quiet? Or would you fight back, the right way, until justice came rolling down your street with flashing lights? Drop a flag emoji if you'd stand your ground, because sometimes the sound of justice isn't a gavel. It's a bolt cutter snapping back. The storm didn't roll in with thunder. It came in with black SUVs, flashing badges, and quiet men who didn't shout when they spoke. Federal marshals, Homeland Security, local police, all converging on one peaceful street that suddenly didn't feel peaceful anymore. By noon, Willowbrook Estates looked less like a suburb and more like a staging ground. The HOA sign out front still said, "A community of order and excellence." But behind those words, the truth was unraveling in front of every neighbor's eyes. Bethany stood near the gate she had chained shut just hours earlier, wrapped in her robe, her face pale, her lips trembling, still insisting she had authority. The same woman who used to march door to door with fines in hand now faced agents with bulletproof vests marked Federal Enforcement Division. Her voice was shrill, desperate, but the sound barely carried over the crackle of radios. "Ma'am, step aside," one agent repeated, his tone flat, unamused. "You can't just barge in here. This is private property," she snapped back, gripping her clipboard like it could protect her. But this wasn't her neighborhood anymore. This was now a federal scene. Homeland Security agents began taking photographs of my Jeep, its sides marked with evidence tape. Every cut in the metal, every broken seal, every tampered panel was documented. The air smelled like oil and heat and panic. Reporters had already begun gathering beyond the cordon, their cameras pointed at the chaos. You could hear the click of shutters and the low murmur of journalists realizing this was more than a local story. Inside the house, Maya watched from the window as the neighborhood's perfect illusion fell apart. For years, Bethany had sold an image: white fences, trimmed lawns, perfect compliance. But now the only thing trimmed short was her reign. The marshals weren't just there for a stolen vehicle. They were there for records, files, emails, and evidence that stretched deeper than anyone imagined. When one agent entered the HOA office, Bethany's sanctuary of power, they found a file cabinet that didn't match the digital records. Dozens of handwritten notes, cash payment logs, and unreported transfers. There were fines that had been paid in cash, checks made out to HOA Community Improvement Fund, and receipts for landscaping that had never happened. That's when one of the marshals made the call. "We're securing all records. This is officially a joint investigation." Carl Wright, her husband, arrived an hour later. Polished suit, politician's smile, that fake confidence that cracked as soon as he saw the badges. He tried to charm his way through it, shaking hands, calling the marshals gentlemen. But charm doesn't work on law enforcement, not when there's federal tape across your wife's front gate. When they told him they had a warrant, the smile dropped. "A warrant? On what grounds?" he demanded. The agent flipped through his folder. "Fraudulent HOA governance, embezzlement of community funds, obstruction of justice, and theft of federal property." The look on Carl's face was priceless, a man realizing he wasn't at a ribbon-cutting ceremony anymore. Word spread fast. By afternoon, the entire neighborhood had gathered in small clusters, whispering, filming, pointing. People who once nodded politely at Bethany now looked at her like a ghost. The same neighbors who'd feared her fines now watched her power drain away in real time. Bethany still tried to hold her ground. "You don't understand," she kept repeating. "This is all a misunderstanding. That Jeep was abandoned. It was a safety concern." But every time she spoke, another agent emerged with a new piece of evidence: a fake bylaw folder, a file of fines that had never been approved by the board, a ledger showing consulting payments to a company registered under Carl's name. Then came the moment that silenced everyone. A young agent opened a drawer labeled Community Violations Archive. Inside were files on nearly every homeowner, pictures, complaint forms, even private information about their jobs and families. It was surveillance, plain and simple. Bethany had been keeping dossiers on the people she ruled over, tracking them, timing them, calculating how to use their weaknesses. When the agent pulled out Grandma Rosa's old file, my grandmother's name in thick ink on the tab, I swear I felt my fists clench from 1,000 miles away. The file contained her hospice records, old medical notes, and letters she'd written asking for extensions on her HOA fees. They'd fined her while she was dying. That was the moment I stopped feeling anger and started feeling something colder. Resolve. Federal law is slow, but it's precise. By evening, subpoenas were in motion. The HOA's accounts were frozen. The Willowbrook development project, Carl's pride and joy, was halted indefinitely. A judge signed off on asset seizures within hours. What Bethany thought was her castle had become evidence storage, but the real chaos wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the silence that followed. The silence of people realizing they'd been living under a lie. The sound of neighbors apologizing to each other for not speaking up sooner. The quiet disbelief of homeowners reading the federal press release online. I was patched into the investigation through a secure call. My supervisor briefed me personally. Rodriguez, you'll be pleased to know we've recovered your equipment intact. But this case goes beyond that. The HOA leadership is under federal review for racketeering and civil rights violations. Your sister's recordings were instrumental. I remember sitting there, phone to my ear, barely breathing. Racketeering, I repeated. That's organized crime. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. For Bethany, this wasn't supposed to happen. In her mind, she'd been invincible, protected by local politics, by Carl's influence, by the illusion that small-town power meant immunity. But federal law doesn't care about gated communities. When you forge signatures, steal money, and tamper with government property, you don't get HOA immunity. You get an arrest warrant. The next morning, the marshals came back, not for more files, but for Bethany herself. The footage from Maya's phone caught it all. Bethany standing in her doorway, arms crossed, her voice trembling. You can't do this to me. I've run this neighborhood for 12 years. The lead marshal looked at her calmly. Ma'am, that's exactly the problem. She didn't go quietly. She screamed. She cried. She tried to call Carl, who was already on his second phone call with lawyers. But none of it mattered. The sound of handcuffs snapping around her wrists was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The same hands that once wrote thousands in fines were now locked behind her back. Maya filmed from the sidewalk, not as revenge, but as proof. Proof for every family who'd been bullied, every veteran who'd been humiliated, every grandmother who'd been overcharged. As the SUVs pulled away, the neighborhood was still. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched. The same perfect lawns and polished fences stood there, but they felt different now, exposed, fragile, real. The illusion of perfection was gone, and for the first time, people saw what was hiding beneath it. That night, the headlines hit. HOA president arrested on federal charges. Suburban development scheme under investigation. Local councilman implicated in property fraud. The story went viral. It wasn't just a neighborhood scandal anymore. It was national news. Comment sections lit up with stories from people across the country who'd faced their own suburban tyrants. Maya's video of the bolt-cutting incident hit 1 million views in less than 24 hours. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the numbers. It was in the phone call I got 2 days later from Captain Chen. Rodriguez, she said, the Inspector General just cleared your case. You're officially out of it. But between us, that woman picked the wrong soldier to mess with. I laughed for the first time in months. Yes, ma'am, I said. She really did. And then came the moment that truly ended her reign, the town hall meeting. The same community center where she used to lecture people about weeds and mailbox colors was now packed with residents ready to vote for a new board. The seats overflowed. People who had avoided meetings for years stood in line to speak. Maya read the statement Grandma Rosa had once written before she passed, a plea for compassion over control. Her voice cracked halfway through, but no one moved. Every word landed like truth cutting through years of fear. When the votes were counted, the new HOA leadership wasn't made of realtors and politicians. It was teachers, veterans, and single parents, regular people who'd lived under Bethany's thumb for too long. For the first time in decades, Willowbrook didn't just look perfect, it felt right. The federal storm eventually passed, but it left the kind of silence that only comes after justice. A cleansing silence, the kind that makes you breathe deeper, like the air itself is lighter now. Bethany's gates were taken down. The HOA president nameplate was removed from her office door. Her husband's development company folded under investigation. And that Jeep, my Jeep, came home. Not just a vehicle anymore, but a symbol of something bigger. Proof that even in the quietest, cleanest suburbs, truth has a way of shaking the ground beneath the powerful. So if you're watching this and you've ever been told to stay quiet, to not make waves, to just follow the rules, remember this story. Sometimes, following the wrong rules keeps the wrong people in charge. Sometimes the only way to protect peace is to break the silence. Because when the storm finally comes, when the real authorities arrive, the ones who built their power on fear don't stand tall. They hide. And the people they tried to silence finally step into the light. That's what happened in Willowbrook. The day the federal storm hit wasn't the day chaos began. It was the day order finally returned. The morning after the storm, Willowbrook Estates looked like it had survived a war. The perfect lawns were still trimmed, the flowers still bloomed, and the white fences still glistened with dew. But something in the air had changed, a heaviness, a silence that came after the shouting stopped. The neighbors didn't wave that morning. They didn't gossip. They just watched the convoy of federal vehicles pull away, and for the first time in years, nobody looked at Bethany's house with envy. They looked at it with disbelief. Inside that two-story mansion, agents spent hours cataloging evidence. Stacks of financial statements, falsified invoices, emails showing years of deceit. Every document told the same story. Greed disguised as governance. What had started as an HOA investigation was now a full-blown financial crime case. Maya stood on the porch with her coffee, wrapped in one of Grandma Rosa's shawls, watching as boxes marked evidence were carried out of the house next door. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that still hadn't faded. After months of tension, threats, and sleepless nights, it was finally happening. Justice was unfolding, one paper at a time. When I called that morning, her voice sounded lighter, like the first deep breath after a long storm. "Tank," she said softly. "They found it. Everything. Fake bylaws. Fraudulent bank transfers." She wasn't just corrupt. She was stealing from all of us. The agents had uncovered 5 years' worth of embezzlement. Over $184,000, siphoned from community funds into shell accounts connected to Carl's development company. Bethany had created fake invoices for lawn care, pool maintenance, and streetlight repairs that never happened. The vendors were fake, the addresses led to empty lots, and the money disappeared into a paper trail of lies, and it didn't stop there. Inside one of the file folders, investigators found something darker, a list titled Non-Compliant Residents. It was a spreadsheet of names, addresses, and personal notes. Beside each name was a column labeled Targeted Action. For some, it said Fine Repeatedly. For others, Enforce Parking Code. But next to Grandma Rosa's name, written in Bethany's handwriting, were 2 words that froze my blood. Pending removal. That's when I understood. My grandmother hadn't just been harassed. She'd been targeted. They'd wanted her gone so they could acquire her property for Carl's project. She'd been sick, vulnerable, and they'd still used the HOA to push her. That revelation changed everything. This wasn't just a story about a power-hungry HOA president. It was about systematic cruelty, the kind that hides behind polite smiles and legal language. Maya recorded a video that day. She stood in front of Grandma's old rose bushes, the ones Bethany once threatened to fine her over, and said, "They tried to erase her. But they forgot her house was built on a foundation stronger than any rule they could write." She uploaded it to social media. Within 24 hours, it had over 500,000 views. People from all over the country commented, veterans, homeowners, teachers, all sharing their own stories of being bullied by HOAs and corrupt boards. The attention lit a fire under the investigation. Federal prosecutors moved quickly. Fraud charges turned into racketeering charges. The development deal with Carl's company was frozen, pending a full audit. Every HOA member who had signed Bethany's fake amendments was interviewed. Some claimed ignorance. Others confessed outright, admitting Bethany had promised them benefits for their silence. Waived fees, landscaping discounts, even hush money. Bethany's pristine image collapsed overnight. News vans camped outside her house. Reporters called her the HOA queen, and not in a flattering way. Every photo of her with a fake smile and a clipboard became a meme. Her quotes about protecting community standards were plastered next to headlines about fraud, theft, and abuse of power. But behind the media frenzy was something even more important: the discovery of the victims. Maya worked with investigators to identify every homeowner Bethany and Carl had targeted. There were families who'd lost homes, veterans who'd moved after being fined into bankruptcy, widows who'd been bullied into selling. The scope of their cruelty was staggering. One file stood out: a woman named Evelyn Torres, a retired nurse. She'd been fined over $30,000 for violating landscaping policy. Her husband had died of cancer and she couldn't afford the upkeep. Bethany's fines forced her to sell the house she'd lived in for 40 years to a developer linked to Carl. The resale profit? Nearly triple what Evelyn got. When the agents showed Maya that file, she cried. She didn't just steal money, Maya said. She stole people's peace. As the evidence mounted, the case expanded. Federal investigators brought in forensic accountants, uncovering links between Carl's construction company and out-of-state investors tied to other planned communities. It wasn't just Willowbrook. It was a network. HOA fraud, hidden behind corporate fronts, spreading through multiple towns. Bethany and Carl were just the most arrogant faces of it. Then came the public reckoning, the day of the indictment. The courthouse was packed, media buzzing, neighbors whispering in disbelief. Bethany sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a beige suit that couldn't hide her shaking hands. Carl sat beside her, jaw clenched, sweat on his brow. The prosecutor read out the charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of records, obstruction of federal investigation, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, conspiracy to commit racketeering. Each count echoed through the courtroom like a hammer striking wood. Bethany tried to speak, her voice trembling. This is a misunderstanding. Everything I did was for the community. The prosecutor didn't even look at her. For the community? He said coldly. You fined elderly women until they lost their homes. You forged bylaws to steal money. You tampered with a federal vehicle. You called it order. We call it organized crime. The trial lasted weeks. Witnesses came forward one by one. Neighbors, board members, contractors. Each one revealed another layer of manipulation. The jury didn't take long. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty on all counts. Bethany's face went blank. Carl's head dropped into his hands. The same woman who once strutted through the neighborhood handing out fines now stood as a convicted felon, facing 8 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, Maya stood surrounded by reporters. They asked her how she felt. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just said, justice doesn't erase what she did, but it means no one else has to live in fear of her again. After the sentencing, the government froze Bethany and Carl's assets. The HOA was placed under federal supervision. Every family who'd been wronged received restitution from the seized funds. And Grandma's house, the house that started it all, became something more. Maya and I founded the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights right there in Willowbrook, a place where veterans could get legal aid when facing housing discrimination or HOA harassment. Grandma Rosa's old living room became the office. Her garden, the one Bethany hated so much, was turned into a memorial space. The irony was poetic. The same home they tried to steal became the one that protected others. Months later, I visited Willowbrook again. The air felt different, lighter, freer. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without their parents worrying about noise complaints. Flags waved proudly in front yards again. The new HOA board was made up of everyday people, honest, humble, fair. The rule book had been rewritten, not with control, but with compassion. As I walked past Bethany's old house, now sold to a young family, I couldn't help but think about how easily power corrupts. All she ever wanted was control, but control without empathy always ends the same way, in ruin. I stopped at Grandma's garden, the sun just beginning to rise over the roses. I could almost hear her voice in the breeze. Do it the right way, mijo, I smiled. We did, Grandma. We finally did. Maya came out onto the porch holding 2 cups of coffee. She'd be proud, you know, she said quietly. Of all of this, I nodded. She'd probably just say, about time, we laughed. For the first time in months, it wasn't bitter. It was real laughter, the kind that comes after peace finally returns. Before leaving, I looked at the street one last time. The fences, the lawns, the homes, everything that once symbolized control now symbolized community. Not perfection, but progress. If there's one thing I learned from all of it, it's that power can build walls, but truth always finds a way to climb over them. You can silence people for a while, intimidate them, fine them, even try to erase them, but eventually someone stands up. And when they do, the whole system of fear comes crashing down. Bethany thought she could build an empire on rules. But rules without integrity are just cages, and when those cages break, the people inside don't just walk free. They rebuild something better. So if you're listening to this right now, remember this: no matter how strong the bully seems, no matter how loud their threats are, truth is louder. And justice, when it comes, doesn't knock softly. It arrives like dawn, slow, steady, and unstoppable. 18 months later, the neighborhood that once trembled under the sound of Bethany's clipboard now woke up to birds, laughter, and the hum of sprinklers instead of confrontation. The same streets that had once been battlegrounds of petty fines and whispered threats were now peaceful, rebuilt, and finally free. But peace didn't arrive overnight. It came slowly, one meeting, one repair, one act of courage at a time. Bethany Kensington Wright, the self-proclaimed queen of Willowbrook Estates, had traded her manicured lawns and designer suits for the gray walls and jumpsuits of federal prison. 8 years. That's what the judge gave her. 8 years to think about the lives she ruined, the money she stole, and the community she destroyed in her obsession with control. Her husband Carl, the smooth-talking developer who thought he could manipulate laws like chess pieces, wasn't far behind. He lost his company, his seat on the city council, and his reputation. Last anyone heard, he was under permanent financial monitoring, working with attorneys just to keep a roof over his head. But their downfall wasn't the headline that mattered most. What mattered was what came after. When the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights officially opened its doors in Grandma Rosa's old house, it wasn't just a legal office. It was a declaration that the people who'd been silenced now had a voice. Maya stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony with tears in her eyes, surrounded by veterans, teachers, single parents, and neighbors who'd once lived in fear. I looked around at the crowd and saw faces that used to turn away when Bethany passed by. Now they were smiling, laughing, clapping. Freedom looked good on them. The front yard had been transformed. Grandma's rose bushes still stood proud, blooming like they were finally breathing again. The foundation plaque sat beneath them, polished and simple. In honor of Rosa Rodriguez, who taught us to stand tall, but with kindness. Inside, the walls were lined with photos. Soldiers coming home, families standing together, neighbors rebuilding what had been broken. Every story was a small victory. Every face, a reminder of why we fought back the right way. Maya ran the day-to-day operations, turning Grandma's dining room into a workspace filled with folders, laptops, and laughter. We had volunteer lawyers helping military families across the state, defending them from illegal evictions, unfair HOA harassment, and housing discrimination. What Bethany once used as a weapon, the rule book, we turned into a shield. The irony was poetic. One afternoon, a young woman came in holding a crumpled notice. She was shaking. "They're trying to fine me for flying my husband's flag," she said quietly. "He's still deployed." Maya smiled softly and handed her a form. "Don't worry," she said. "We've seen this story before, and we know exactly how it ends." Word spread fast. Within months, the foundation became a lifeline for people across the state. Families wrote letters thanking us. Veterans sent photos from overseas holding signs that said, "Keep fighting the good fight." For the first time, what happened in Willowbrook wasn't just a scandal, it was a movement. I still remember the first time I walked into Grandma's old living room after the renovations were done. Her rocking chair sat by the window, exactly where she used to sit every evening, watching the sunset over the driveway. The light hit the same way it always did, golden, warm, peaceful. For a moment I could almost see her there, smiling at us. I whispered, "We did it, Grandma." And I swear if houses could exhale, that one did. But even as peace settled in, the echoes of what happened lingered. The community had changed forever. People talked differently now, more openly, more honestly. HOA meetings weren't silent or scripted anymore. They were filled with laughter, disagreement, and genuine democracy. The new board was made up of real people, a retired firefighter, a nurse, a teacher, and even Mr. Henderson, the old veteran who once threatened to stand in front of the tow truck. He now chaired the meetings with humor instead of fear. "No one's cutting any locks under my watch," he'd joke, and everyone would laugh. The fines that once ruined lives were replaced with community service initiatives. Instead of punishing people, the HOA started helping, painting old fences, fixing broken lights, organizing food drives. They even renamed the main park after Grandma Rosa. Rosa Park, the sign read, dedicated to kindness, community, and courage. That park became the heart of Willowbrook. On weekends, families gathered for cookouts. Kids raced their bikes down the same streets Bethany once patrolled with her clipboard, and the sound of laughter filled the air where fear used to live. Every corner told a new story now, not of rules, but of redemption. A local news station came back to do a follow-up story. The reporter, the same one who'd covered Bethany's arrest, asked me, "How does it feel seeing this place now?" I looked around, at the families playing, at Maya handing out lemonade, at the flag waving gently over Grandma's house, and said, "It feels like justice finally learned how to smile." The video went viral. People loved seeing how the community healed. But more than that, they saw proof that standing up for what's right doesn't always require anger or revenge. Sometimes it just needs courage and persistence. Still, not everything was perfect. Healing never is. There were scars and emotional ones. Some neighbors still carried guilt for staying silent too long. Others struggled to forgive. But over time, forgiveness grew like the roses in Grandma's garden. Slowly, beautifully, and with purpose. One evening, about a year after Bethany's sentencing, Maya and I received a letter from her. Handwritten. The envelope was plain. The return address printed from a federal correctional facility. I hesitated to open it, but Maya said, "Maybe it's time." The letter was surprisingly short. Her handwriting was neat, careful. I've had a lot of time to think. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say this. I let power consume me. I told myself I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was really protecting my ego. I see that now. You exposed me and it hurt, but maybe it needed to. Maybe I needed to fall to understand the harm I caused. I hope what you built fixes what I broke. Bethany. We sat in silence after reading it. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a strange sense of closure. Maya folded the letter neatly and placed it in Grandma's old Bible on the shelf. "Let it rest here," she said. And that's what we did. Months later, the foundation received a grant from the Department of Veterans Affairs to expand nationwide. What started as one house in a quiet neighborhood was now becoming a national network, fighting HOA corruption, protecting deployed families, and giving people the knowledge to stand their ground. When the announcement went public, I recorded a short message for social media. The video was simple, me standing in front of Grandma's garden. "I'm not here to talk about revenge," I said. "I'm here to talk about what happens after justice, about rebuilding, about community. We started this fight because one woman thought she was above the law. We finished it because people like you refused to stay silent. So if you've ever been bullied by power, whether it wears a badge, a title, or a smile, remember this: they can scare you, but they can't silence the truth." Not forever. That video reached over 10 million people. Thousands of comments poured in. Stories from homeowners, veterans, single moms, and everyday citizens saying they felt seen, understood, empowered. The Rodriguez Foundation became a symbol, not of victory, but of hope. Every time I drive past Willowbrook now, I roll the window down and listen. The laughter, the quiet, the simple sounds of peace. They mean more than any courtroom victory ever could. The house that once stood as a target of hate is now a beacon of healing. The street that once trembled under fear now echoes with the sound of kids playing, flags waving and neighbors helping neighbors. It's funny. For all her rules, Bethany never understood the one rule that matters most. Real communities aren't built on control. They're built on care, and Grandma's words still echo in my mind. "Do it the right way, mijo," because we did. We fought the right fight. We turned pain into purpose, fear into fuel, and one broken neighborhood into proof that even when power corrupts, truth restores. So if you're watching this right now, maybe you're in your own version of Willowbrook. Feeling like you can't fight back, remember this. You can. You don't need anger. You don't need revenge. You just need courage, proof, and the will to stand tall, because justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent. It's about reminding the world that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how untouchable they think they are, is above what's right. When good people come together, tyrants fall. Every time, so share this story. Tell it to someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, another Bethany is writing her next fake rule, and another Rosa is quietly fighting back. And maybe your voice is the one that tips the scale. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers through roses, through laughter, through peace restored, and when it does, you'll know. Because you'll look around, and for the first time in a long time, your world will feel free again.